There we go. We're live.
Hello out there, citizens of Gotham. It's that time of year again, one of my favorite times. It puts a smile on my face. So I want you all to stay spooky.
By now there are no more screens.
Stay spooky with chicks and spirits.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Stay Spooky with Chicks and Spirits. I am your spectacular host, Heather, and with me tonight this way.
Hi, I'm Denise. I'm filling in for Kelly. She's busy working, and so I'm just filling in today.
Yay! And Callista is still dealing with a lot of stuff with her wedding, which is this Saturday. Another clap.
Awesome.
I'm excited for that. Yeah, so hopefully next week, we'll have everybody back in studio and everything's running normal. It's just been really crazy with everybody's schedules right now, but we're working it out. So, hi, Kristen. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the
Kristen.
And we're continuing our cult talk tonight. Tonight we are talking about the death of Sister Margaret and Paul. So our guests tonight are Joe and Jennifer Shortridge. Let's bring them right on.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi,
Welcome.
how are you?
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Thanks for being on. So tell us a little bit about you guys before we get, going into our topic.
Okay. Well, Joe and I are 222 Paranormal Podcast. We have been on the air for 5 years now.
5 years.
So we have over 250 shows under the belt. We are going into our 6th season here in a couple weeks. But we've been ghost hunting and paranormal podcasting I've been ghost hunting for almost 20 years now. And Joe,
about
a little bit
6
behind
or 7,
her. 6 or 7. But Joe is the mastermind and the wizard behind all of the podcasts, and I just show up and eat snacks on the air, and that's it.
I noticed my chair is really short in this video.
Oh, we're about the same height. But Joe is my older brother, and I am his bratty little sister.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
50 years old and still the baby.
Nice. Hi, everybody that's watching.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, and we're going to, we'll have comments come up later, but go ahead and put your stuff out there. Our network guy, he shares out a lot of stuff during the show, so, I'll address the comments as they come in, but they won't pop up on the screen until he gets back, and then he does all that. So he handles everything for me. I absolutely love it.
Kinda like your brother, right?
It's so nice. I love it. He just stays backstage, though. So yeah, you guys, pitched this case to me, and I was pretty interested about it. So, go ahead and dive in. You guys tell us the story and just let our guests know what's, going on.
Yeah, we as we know, we grew up in Toledo, and this case made national headlines. I mean, it was like the world just descended on Toledo when they found out about this. And it's a very interesting story about a nun who was ritualistically murdered in a chapel on Easter.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, what's really interesting about the story, is that it's not very often that nuns are murdered and allegedly by a priest. It is the only case that a priest has been charged with a nun's murder in the United States.
Yeah, since like the 1600s.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's an interesting case. So, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about who was Sister Margaret Ann Paul, just so I have an understanding and the listeners kind of just get a feel for who this woman was. So, she had grown up in northwestern Ohio. And at a very young age, she had a calling to, become a nun and join the convent. She was one of 9 children, I believe it was. And coming from a very large family, she had, of course, typical Catholic family in Ohio, right?
30 kids.
1,500 kids. Big families. We come from a big family. There's 6 of us in our family, but that's a whole nother story, a whole nother topic, right? But
you two are close.
Right. She was born in April 6th, 1909, and she was the 4th of the 9 children. And her parents were farmers. So, they didn't come from any exquisite background. They were just hardworking folks. And she just had this calling at a very young age. And they tried to dissuade her from going into, being, into a religious convent at the time. But she had cousins who were nuns. And I don't know if they would like to be called nuns or sisters. I don't know if there's a difference, but
Yeah, I never know if there was. Some people don't. I don't know. I have to ask somebody that. A nun. Yeah. Can I call you a nun, or is it sister?
Nun is more like a slang term, but I think it's readily acceptable now.
I would love to ask that to a nun, and she says, "I don't give a shit."
What's up, sister?
What's up, sister?
Yeah. So she, was the whole family was very devout Catholics, and so they accepted that she wanted to join the convent, and she had come to, I believe it was Fremont, to join the cloister or whatever they call it at that time. And she became a Sister of Mercy after she had gone to finishing school. Now, she went into, I think they would call it the devotion, and went through the process until she had become a nun. What's interesting, though, is when she left the house to go to the convent, she laid out all of her worldly possessions and left them to different people in her family. And they didn't know that until they came back home after dropping her off, which I thought was really interesting. And she was a very devout religious woman. She cared very deeply about her calling and her faith. And she really was very pious, as they would say, and a very devout nun, and very proud of who she was and her calling in life. She, it was interesting that when she did go, she became the director after she graduated. I don't know if you call it graduate. Is that a good word for it?
Transcended to
whatever.
Became
nunnery. A nun, right? And so
bigger hats.
Right.
Bigger hats.
So when you join a different nunnery, I guess you'd call it, the different faiths.
Like the convents.
Yeah, the different convents. Each one has a different calling. So certain ones would be service nuns. So they would go out into the community, and their devotion is to servicing other people. There are, like, the Sisters of Mercy were education. So they would become teachers. There are nuns that would just, their order would be for serving the poor or whatever their devotion was. So hers was that, the Sisters of Mercy were educators. So she became the director of the School of Nursing. And later she became the administrator at St. Charles Hospital in Oregon and at Mercy Hospital in Tiffin. Mm-hmm. So Oregon is just right outside of Toledo. It's just, just not even a couple miles away. So when we say Toledo, it's the general northwestern Ohio area, just to give all your listeners kind of a feel for the area. But she, she served for probably close to 30 to 35 years. And as her retirement was drawing near in the early or the late 70s, going into the 80s, she just had a real troubled heart about that, because she didn't want to give up her service. She didn't want to not fulfill her calling, I guess we would say. And it really troubled her that, she would almost be forced to retire and not be able to do the things she did. And she had a great devotion to this chapel. And the chapel was within the hospital. So, and if anybody's gone to a Catholic hospital, they always have like a chapel inside there where you can, and they're very small. You can have services, or, you could just go in and pray at any time. But generally, every Sunday they would have a mass in there. So if there were any patients in the hospital, they could come to the chapel and attend mass on Sunday. One of Sister Margaret Ann's responsibility as working in the hospital was taking care of the chapel. So it was very important to her that it was in good shape. It was very clean. And they even talked about her being very distressed the day before she was murdered, that the chapel, she wanted to be in perfect shape. And so, it was just a kind of an eerie turn of events right before the days that she had, on the day that she had murdered. It was the day before her birthday. And like Joe said, it was
Easter.
And so,
Easter Saturday.
Saturday. And I believe they discovered her body on Easter Sunday, correct? And so
did she, we have a question where someone said, didn't she give it up because her hearing was going bad?
Yeah, that was part of it too. As we all do, like, I'm 50 years old, I'm starting to fall apart, right? You get older, and those are things that, you have a great concern, is that, am I going to be, what is my contribution to society? Am I still going to be able to be active and do the things that you love to do? And so, maybe that's part of it. Maybe she didn't hear somebody coming up behind her when she was attacked and murdered. Or maybe she confronted that person.
Yeah.
We don't know. There's so many weird things about this case. And, Joe can give us a little bit more detail of just kind of like maybe the timeline or what had happened that day.
Yeah, because like we said, it was April 5th, 1980, Easter weekend. So, Father, like Jen was saying, that sister would take care of the chapel, but Father Robinson was actually in charge of the chapel. He was in charge of it. She took care of it. The morning of April 5th, two officers or somebody ran up to the officers, and two officers heard that there was a nun murdered in the chapel. So right away they started running there. And on the way to the chapel, Father Robinson and another priest caught up with them. So they all ran to the chapel. When they did arrive at the chapel, they found the nun laying on the ground, and she was covered up in a cloth, which ends up being the altar cloth. They pulled that cloth away and found out that she was murdered, stabbed, what I have down here, at least 31 times she was stabbed. They know that she was strangled. The way that they found her body, it was positioned as if she was sexually assaulted also, but there was never any test done that proved that. But one of the interesting things is they know that she was stabbed at least 31 times. Now, those stabs could have been in the same holes again, so that she could have been stabbed even more than that. But the interesting thing is 9 of them were in the shape of an inverted cross. So somebody actually made the cross on her chest.
And you think about it, when you have a stabbing, and somebody is repeatedly stabbing, there is a lot of emotion attached to that. There, if somebody is just going to kill you, they're just going to slice your throat, right?
Right.
Be done with you, right in the heart, one time and one and done. That's a crime of passion.
Oh, well, it's overkill completely.
Yeah, sure.
And then there's a lot behind it. I mean, being that the cross was all implemented in that and upside down. I mean, there's a lot going on with all of that.
That kind of isn't that kind of suggestive of like a satanic ritual?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they took care of her body. 9 days later, Robinson actually performed her funeral. And then 2 weeks after that, he was called in to the police station to be interviewed about the murder and if he knew anything. And I feel that they had suspicions of him in the beginning because now some people say that Father Robinson had two sides to him. He was very nice, but he also had a real bad temper. Who knows? Anybody could have.
There were people and witnesses who had come forward that said in the past that Father Robinson and Sister Margaret had arguments over things in the chapel, of how she wanted to take care of it, or maybe what was going on in their decoration or whatever. And that was a common thing that they were noted and overheard arguing.
Which you wouldn't think that, as stoic as they are as a nun and a priest, you wouldn't think that they would argue like that, but they're people too.
Right. I mean, just because you're a priest doesn't mean you don't have a temper or you don't drink or like
this is true.
Yeah.
Now, when the coroner investigated it, they believed that she had been strangled from behind by very large hands. But what I don't get, if she's been strangled, she would have passed out, right?
Oh, yeah.
Could there have been two people, one strangling her and one stabbing her?
Well, I think that there was.
Could this have been?
I mean,
I think there was
two suspects to this.
Now, they did find blood under her fingernails, and they did find out that blood did not belong. It belonged to a male, but it did not belong to Father Robinson.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
They did think that there was accomplices, other priests that could have been involved.
Oh.
And they brought Robinson into the interrogation room, and he was having trouble with it because he did admit that he knew who did it, but he couldn't say anything because he heard it in confessional. And the oath of the Catholic Church is basically saying if you heard something in the confessional, you don't speak about it to anybody else.
At that time.
Go to prison for that. You know what I mean? When it comes to prison,
yeah.
How do you hold your oath? You know what I mean?
I was thinking the same thing. It's like, where do you draw that line? I mean, we're talking about a woman that was murdered violently and ritualistically, and he won't admit to it or admit that he knew who did it.
Well, there's two sides to that, right? Either he did it, or he is so devoted to his faith and following the rules of the church at that time. Now, I think they have changed this since then. That if a priest does hear something in confession that I don't know if the Pope gives special permission or something. I don't know. But, so, it's like, do you keep your vow of, that sanctity, or would you?
Yeah, you're basically letting someone. Yeah, you're basically letting a murderer go.
Right.
Exactly.
And he may be thinking, well, God's punishment is more than we could ever give them. But that doesn't help the family, doesn't help the community, and the family wants to know what happened.
And what I found interesting was that he actually presided over the ceremony of her death.
Yeah, her funeral.
He did all of that, and it's like, I don't know if he did that. I mean, what kind of soul does he have?
Exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's pretty cold and vacant.
Yeah,
for sure.
And a lot of times they say arsonists and murderers, they come back to the scene of the crime because they
Mhm.
want to see who comes to, right? So like it wouldn't be surprising if you were trying to cover your tracks to be like, well, I'm right out in the forefront. I'm having, I'm performing this funeral for her. It couldn't be me.
Yeah.
But this is an interesting part that not many people know or have heard of, is that when the investigators were collecting all of their evidence, they found a linen in the hallway. Okay. And when they unfolded this cloth, it appeared to have blood stains on it. Now, once they did their examination, they found out that the pieces of cloth the stab wounds went through the cloth. So this cloth had been placed over her. She was stabbed. Somebody took it off and then folded it up and put it in the hallway, which is really interesting. So why, if you were just committing this murder and you were stabbing her and then you covered her up with the altar cloth.
That's what I was thinking. But I was thinking too is the cloth that they found.
Really interesting. Piece of the
I just
puzzle.
picture them strangling her to the ground and then stabbing her. So I think that she was already either dead or out of it when they stabbed her.
Someone said that she was
Probably
strangled.
unconscious.
Yeah, 2 bones and blood vessels in her eyes were bulging.
Yeah.
So who knows at that point, once those bones broke, was she dead at that moment?
Yeah. That's
And then just went for overkill at the end of it. But it's like, why? Like, if this guy if the priest did do this and, I don't know, sometimes people are psychopaths and they just get into a profession where they have access to people. You know what I mean? And vulnerable people.
They had like 3 witnesses that saw the priest around that chapel at the time of the murders.
Which would make sense though, because he was in charge of the chapel though.
Right.
But with that cloth that they found, it's almost like a ritual where they brought her to the ground, they covered her up, and then they performed their satanic or whatever you want to call thing on her, where they stabbed her so many times. But one interesting thing too is when they brought the priest, Father Robinson, into interrogation, at the time, the deputy chief of Toledo Police, Ray Vedder, allowed the Monsignor of the district of the church to come in, remove Robinson from the investigation. He also, within the next couple of days, went around to all the detectives, asked for their paperwork, and collected up all the evidence or paperwork on the case. And to this day, there's some articles of the paperwork that are still missing.
That's interesting.
And a lot of people were mad because the deputy chief let him in there, the Monsignor, to come in and just take him.
Yeah.
Because was it his priest? I mean, people are told to believe their priest and they follow their priest and they hold them to this higher, you know what I mean? Being that even a police chief, if that's his priest, do we know if it was? Probably did let him get away with some stuff because it's this is my guy. So
yeah, they did say that the Ray Vedder was a Catholic, but they didn't say what church he went to or anything like that.
Yeah,
I bet you it was that church.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Yeah. But you think about the time. This is like almost 40-something years ago. It was different times back then. The church has a lot of power. If you were a Monsignor, you would have, some sway over maybe the mayor or with the police. At that time, that was a position of power and respect.
Oh, yeah.
So, who's to say you just wouldn't say, like, we'll handle this.
Right.
And I mean, and through time, they've always been kind of shoving things under the carpet where the priests are concerned. They would just transfer them to different parishes and not hold them accountable for anything.
Yeah, because in 2003, when the case was reopened, a lot of the sex scandal and stuff was going on with the priests.
Yeah, that was definitely coming to the
Which in my eyes makes the Catholic Church a huge cult. to me. I mean, we're talking
Mhm.
cults, and we're actually talking definition of cults. You know, the Catholic Church. I mean, come on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
just by definition, you know.
exactly. I was going to say the definition of an occult is where it's ran by a person comes in and starts it up. Well, technically, Jesus started it 2,000,
Well, I mean,
20,000 years
you have to
ago.
look at the definition between a cult and a religion, right? A religion, you know, the priest is a symbol and he is a figure, whereas a cult, that particular person wants to be worshipped.
So
But you get these churches, though. You get some of these churches where you get these people that also feel that same way, but they hide behind, you know, God to use that. So how many wars, how many things have fell because of religion? So they take the name of God and they run it into, okay, I'm going to make myself this almighty being, and then the cult follows amongst that. So even though it's not saying like, you know, everybody that follows God is going to be called. I'm not saying that I believe in God. You know, it's a very touchy subject, but people get behind the Catholic religion and all of that, and they make these cult-like things that happen, and they follow it. And these are beings, these priests that you give your money to, and all, I mean, organized religion.
And all the wars in the name of religion, you know, huge.
yeah,
So
and you know, in anything that people follow, you're going to have that certain section of them that are just whack jobs, no matter what it is.
Yeah, there's always a subsect. I mean, even in the Satanic Church, there is, you know, yes, they worship Satan, but then there's offshoots that perform murders and rituals and sacrifice.
Yeah, and you know, here in Toledo, it's rumored that the Satanic Church is very, very big here. And back in the 80s, they actually called it the Satanic Panic.
Oh,
and
really?
There was a lot of stuff going on in Toledo that backed that up. I mean, it was big back then.
Yeah. So
is it still around over there?
I've heard that is, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's just mostly rumor right now. There's really no evidence of that. We have some magic and witchcraft going on. I know that. And you know, there is one certain place that has been rumored to be doing rituals and sex magic. Can't confirm or deny that. I've never been there. But you know,
road trip.
What's interesting though is, and what ties this particular murder case to cult activity, you know, obviously is her ritual stabbing. That is definitely you know, a real big red flag. But what happened was, when Father Robinson went on trial 20 something years later after the murder, you know, it took all that time and the case being reopened to bring forth, to bring him, you know, into the judicial system. When they started putting him on trial, there was a young woman who stepped forward. She was in her 20s at the time, and she has remained anonymous since then. But she came forward and recognized him from when she was a child, being part of and an unwilling participant in the satanic, I guess you would call it
like there was an actual cult.
A cult, yeah. So, like, I can't think of the word because I have COVID brain, but so she came forward accusing him of being one of the people in this cult that had abused her and used her for their ritual practices. So
they called her Survivor Doe.
Yeah.
Keep it all.
So that's what kind of opened it up to have it again.
Yeah, she came forward and they reopened the case in 2016 is when it went to court, because she kept saying, well, she recognized Father Robinson from the cult that I don't want to say molesting, but was
They were
abusing her.
molesting. Yes, they were sexually abusing her
Mhm.
and other children. And we, it was really interesting because at the time that back in the 80s, in 1985, there was what that we called the Satanic Panic here in Toledo. So it made national headlines, and all of the big news agencies flocked to Toledo in one weekend because there was a report that they had found this area of Toledo that these sacrifices have been taking place. Um, they couldn't find, and DNA was just at the forefront at that time, so it really wasn't prevalent. It was more like your fingerprints and evidence. So the sheriff at the time, he had gone over to this area based on some claims. They started digging around. Well, when the news got wind of this, the major news, NBC, ABC, CBS, had all descended on Toledo and were following the store super, super closely. It was like national headline news. When they dug up this location where in the woods, and at the time it was a wooded area. I think it's a what is it now, Joe? It's a auto
Like an auto
graveyard type place,
parts place,
chop shop type place. Now, they had extracted from the dirt in the spot where people had claimed that there were ritual sacrifices, infants' shoes, infant clothing, women's clothing, blood-stained items. There were rumors that there were bones found of infant children. I don't have any evidence of that. It's alleged, but you know how rumors start, right? There's usually some little hint of truth to what they had found. So, they really did I don't want to say a witch hunt, but a real deep dive into some of these people that they claim to be part of this. And now, I don't think there were probably 20 people in this.
One of the weird things they did find in that when they dug it up was a bunch of men's shoes, but it was all the left shoe. There was no right shoes.
Yeah.
That's sadistic in its
That's
own.
quite interesting. Yeah.
Like what's that?
All the missing socks from the dryer showed up now.
The weirdos is taking all the right shoes.
Or taking off the right limb and hiding it somewhere.
Yeah.
But
where Rusty from Central Michigan's talking about the lady, I'm assuming, that came forward, said she had to eat human eyeballs, and other part of her story was she was penetrated by a snake and was also placed in a coffin with live cockroaches and the lid closed. That's awful. Like that.
I've never heard of any of that.
Yeah,
we have to get that article to us, Rusty, because that's crazy.
Yeah, and part of the claim too that the sheriff had investigated were that there were 5 people a year since 1969 had been sacrificed to Satan at this altar. And what's really interesting is that there was a guy who and gosh, I can't think of his name right now. We did a podcast about it. I can't think of the name of it, but he was very big in the Satanic Church. I don't know if he was the head of it or he had done something. And Chris Tillman from Haunted Toledo had found this letter written, a copy of this letter written by him to the head of the church, or from the head of the church to him. And he kind of disappeared, and it was a really strange case because they were investigating him and he disappeared and nobody could find him. But the interesting is Joe bought his first car from the car lot where that guy's house stood.
Yeah, I probably bought it from him.
He probably bought it from
Christine over there.
Wow.
But yeah, there's been a lot of situations like that where churches have popped up here in Toledo. And there's a story of a girl named Cersei that moved here from California. And she opened up a shop too. But for some reason, she was like real popular in the cult or in the community.
Yeah, she was a witch.
And when all this started coming up, she disappeared. They don't know if she went back to California or what, but she just like
Vanished.
yeah.
Which is interesting. That
Now, one of the other things that kind of put Father Robinson into this case is he had a letter opener that was in the shape of a sword, and they found that back in 1980 at the crime scene, or no, I'm sorry, in his office.
mm-hmm.
And they said that when they checked the stab wounds, it matched the blade width and the diameter of the blade of that. Now, they didn't do any blood analysis on that, I don't believe, because back then they really, I don't want to say it wasn't
They
very
could do
popular.
blood type, but they
Yeah.
couldn't do DNA, and it
Mhm.
corroded by the time the case came around 21 years later.
Now, another thing too is she was known to carry scissors, and those scissors were never recovered. Now, she used to carry scissors because it was a working hospital. Jen's theory was that maybe she was arguing with somebody, but I think it was just because it was a working hospital and there was a lot of different type of people coming in and out of there.
Well, in a hospital, most nurses carry scissors in their, to cut bandages or anything really. You could trim flowers.
Yeah.
She could have been trimming flowers for the altar.
But she was known to carry these scissors all the time, and they said that the style of scissors that she had, if they did a test on it, if they had the scissors, they could tell by the wound in her jaw that I know that the detective actually said that it would be a perfect fit for that size of scissor that they have. So they think that they also used her scissors to do the killing. And I think that they used his letter opener that looked like a sword.
Part of the evidence that they found, didn't they also find some satanic literature in his office? Or
that I don't know about. But I do know that another interesting thing is when they pulled the altar cloth off of her, they did find blood on her forehead. So somebody offered the last rites in her own blood.
So they did the whole.
Yeah, with her own blood.
Wow. That is really, I didn't know that. That was interesting. But,
so was he ever known to be attached to any other cult or anything such, like that?
Well, there was a cult that he was supposed to be a part of. And what they were a bunch of men that would dress up like nuns and do just weird stuff. I'm not sure exactly what, but they would do weird things. And another strange thing about it is they would call themselves by women's names, but put Jerry at the end of it, like Sister Mary Ann Jerry or Sister Margaret Jerry. They would all, I don't understand why they would put the name Jerry after it, but the actual name of the cult was the Sisters of Assumed Mary. And that was the name of their group. They called themselves a cult, but who knows if they were.
Right.
Wow.
Pretty sad.
Yeah.
He was convicted in when was he convicted?
He was found guilty May 11th of 2006.
Okay.
In court, and he was sent to prison. He eventually did die in prison. And though when he was in prison, he kind of kept to himself. He didn't really talk to anybody about the case. He basically didn't talk to anybody about anything. He was really quiet, kept to himself, never admitted to it. He did, like back when it happened, he did say that he took confession of the person that did it, but was it a friend of his? We don't know.
Or his own personal confession.
Yeah, he took it to the grave, and nobody knows really. And there was really no closure to this case because he went to the grave knowing either he did it or he knew the person that did.
We had a comment up here earlier. Let me see. Okay. Where someone, Jeff, said, in my opinion, if that's a vow, it's stupid. I agree. Nothing about Christianity should let anyone get away with murder. And I agree with that. Like if he did, murder these people or murder her and or didn't or knew the person. I mean, I just don't see somebody like, once again, holding that vow. Like I feel like your vow to her, more to her, and what you that was your sister or whatever they are, it's a nun. Like shouldn't you have more loyalty or whatever your vows should be more to them? So
you shouldn't have protection.
No.
Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Not at that level, and
Right.
I mean, the sanctity of the confessional, yes, it's sort of like a doctor. Doctor
It's
can't
kind of
talk
like
about his
HIPAA.
patient, but
Yeah.
but at what point do you say, well, I got to tell somebody about this,
I think that this case, because it was the only case where a priest was convicted of murdering a nun in the United States, had the church had to address this and talk about what happens in confession, and if somebody does confess to a crime, at what point do you say, okay, I killed a man 20 years ago, or I just murdered my child? At that point, there's got to be something where they say, okay,
or you go into a priest and you say, 5 of us dressed up like nuns went into a chapel on Easter Saturday and ritualistically murdered a nun.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would think that their ethics and morals alone would, make them come forth with any type of information like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. It would bypass all of that.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, I think, it was just different times back then. And, it's funny because you say it was the 80s and we think, oh, the 80s was like 10 years ago. It's like, that was 40 years ago. Like, what the heck?
That messes with me too. So,
When did that happen?
we go.
I still listen to 80s music, though.
Well, right.
Me too.
It's the best music.
It is. Everybody makes fun of me and they're like, Heather, seriously? And I'm like, just let me live my life. I love it.
I was asked one time because I was on a rock and roll podcast and everybody's like, what was your first album? And I'm like, the Hooters. Like, the what? The who? It was the 80s, all right?
Yeah. Actual albums, real albums.
I remember albums. Good times.
Oh, we used to take our 45s and like fling them out the window. The neighbors.
I remember cassette tapes and stuff.
Yeah.
No clue what that is. My son, his
8 tracks.
His grandmother gave him and this is like, he's 23 now, but he was like 7 or whatever. But she gives him for a gift for Christmas, a set of like blank cassette tapes. So he comes back to me and he's like, Mom, he's like, did grandma just give me some kind of garbage bags or something? I'm like, what? And he hands me these cassette tapes and I start busting laughing. He's like, what are they? What do I do with them? And I'm like, it's so funny that you have no clue what this is, but what is this gift? Where did she even get this from? Like, we're past CDs. I mean, they're already on iPods and stuff like that. She's having them cassette tapes and he's just like, what is this crazy contraption? It's like, times have changed, but
use them for ghost hunting.
Yeah. Exactly. But and you say times have changed, but it's interesting too because times have changed. It was very prevalent of what was going on here in the Toledo area with the cults and the satanic, and now it's I believe it's out there, but it's so dark web and it's so underground right now. Like you just don't hear about it very often. It's almost like the hush. But I watch some of the shows and listen to podcasts, and it's really prevalent, and it's just not mainstream.
No,
you guys come across that?
Even when this was going on, you had like Ricky Ramirez was the Night Stalker.
Oh yeah,
Mr.
Richard, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that was going on during the same time as all this, and him going into court with the pentagram on his hand and stuff, and when they say the Satanic Panic, it was a true thing back then. It was really going on, and
across the nation. Really,
when this happened, it just in Toledo here, it just blew it up.
Yeah,
I mean it.
Well, and like what Jennifer says, it's I feel it's still out there too. People probably have Facebook groups and stuff like that to keep it underground to what is going on. I mean, there's still going to be cults. There's still going to be followings. It's just who knows? We don't know what we've seen, or the worst is yet to come. Who knows? You know what I mean? I think you just always need that perfect storm of that person to bring people together on that same. Like I said before, sometimes you see it in the paranormal field. There's somebody that people get behind, and then it becomes this craziness behind these people. And it's almost like cult-like sometimes, where it's like, I'm not getting behind that because that just I'm not thinking. I'm not being told how I'm supposed to think. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but you see it all the time.
Well, an idea catches on and, it picks up momentum and people follow it. And then they just start, blindly doing different things that they probably deep down don't even believe in, but they just kind of get caught up in, the momentum.
Yeah, they want to be part of a group.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just feel like they belong somewhere. I think that's where a lot of these things, cults, they start spinning because people want to belong. People want to belong, and they feel like, oh, I finally belong. And then it's like, okay, but now you got to do this crazy shit, and they're just like, okay.
I'll tell you, and this is controversial, but because a lot of people joined Scientology. When I lived in Los Angeles, I lived right like a couple blocks from the Celebrity Center, and you couldn't walk down the street there, like, because they would come up and they would be like just trying to recruit you everywhere, and they were relentless. They would follow you to your house and stand outside your apartment door, and it was scary. It's like, so I kind of got an eye for those people. So like I was really fortunate. I had an apartment where I could walk to work right on Hollywood Boulevard. Well, Hollywood they call it Hollyweird, right? You wouldn't believe the things that they, put the people through there. You have to max out all your credit cards. You have to buy all of these levels and books, and it's really, really easy to get into that, but very hard to get out of it.
Scientology, we've touched on every week of cults.
Okay.
Because it does, just like you're the first one that said that you've actually come in contact with these people approaching you. So that's very interesting. Like, it's like trying to sell you a chair. Like, leave me alone. You know what I mean?
You have to be very, very forceful with them, and they know that you're onto them, because if you show any sign of weakness, they are so manipulative. They know just the right words to say. They know keywords and phrases. They know how to get inside your head. And the whole thing is about money. Truly it is.
Would you say they're more persistent trying to like bring people on than like the Jehovah's Witnesses that go to door?
Absolutely. Because they sell you a dream of you're going to be promoted, and they kind of liken it to a military, right? They have like this section called the Sea Org where you wear a uniform and there's ranks. But if you guys probably talked about like just the horror stories of these people who get trapped in this or are born into it.
We haven't actually gone into it, but I think I'm going to have an episode where we dive into it. But yeah, everybody that's touched down has used the comparison of, like Scientology. So we've used the comparison, but actually diving into it, we haven't done that yet. Yeah. But I think it probably should be done. I mean, I might have people busting through my house. But
that'd be an interesting topic, though, to discuss.
Oh, yeah. I just will have to mask it as something else.
Yeah.
Right. Free talk tonight.
But
it's scary. Like I never knew like what they do to recruit people or anything like that. So it's just
it's interesting. If you ever watch any documentaries, I recommend some about that. It's really fascinating. If you look at it from a psychological perspective, and this is totally random, but it just popped into my mind. We're talking about cults and about Satanists. A couple of years ago, and this is just the weirdest thing. Okay, so a couple of years ago, I don't just, how you go on YouTube and you're just stumbling around and you're looking at, I was trying to look at angel stories. Joe and I were prepping for a show, and we were doing it about guardian angels, and I came across this video about this guy who had been born into Satanism, and he was kind of like, and I don't know if you guys have seen this video, stop me if you have. He was almost like the chosen one, right? Like he was going to become the high priest, and he did everything, everything you could think of, like sacrifices and drugs and sex and manipulation and torture, whatever. At one point, he died, went to hell, right? I don't know if he had a heart attack. I can't remember. I think he was doing drugs and he died, and had died and went to hell. And it was so bad that he cried out for Jesus, and Jesus saved him, right? So like he came out of this, somebody saved his life or whatever. I don't know if they narcaned him or what. And he came back being one of the most dedicated high priests in this cult. I guess we can call it cult, religion, whatever
Church
it is.
of Satanism.
Church of Satan, to completely do a 180 and say, no, this is terrible. And it's really just fascinating because I was just on YouTube yesterday looking around, totally random, like looking at like people playing slot machines, and that video popped up.
Oh.
And I was like,
wow,
oh, this is weird. This is like too much of a coincidence, right? It's just
nothing's by coincidence for sure.
I don't believe in coincidence ever.
Everything for a reason.
Looking into cults, that was just a really interesting story. Like, and I, just watching it, he was very emotional about it, and it was just fascinating to be from one extreme to the other.
Yeah.
And, near-death experiences, we've covered that a lot on different shows, and there are people that, everybody thinks that you pass away and you see a light and all that, but there are stories of people that have gone to hell and saw what it was. And, for him being the chosen one of the Satanistic Church to actually do a complete change and being... Well,
he expected when he died and went to hell that it would be heaven for him. You know what I mean? And it wasn't. It was awful.
Yeah, 9 to 5 at a shit job. I was like, no.
We're going to have all these women and drinks, and it's going to be warm and sunny.
It was over, and Nickelback was playing.
I love it. It is hell. But I mean, that's crazy. I mean, I've actually never heard of anybody that had a near-death experience that went to hell. So that's interesting to actually.
Oh, there's a lot of different ones. Like depending on your, people from India, some of those are just crazy. I mean, like in the movie Beetlejuice, where they're sitting in the office, and the team comes in and they're like, "Are we dead, coach?" and stuff. And there's been stories out of India when people have near-death experiences that they actually are like that. One guy, he had a near-death experience. He went in, and it was like an office. And this guy had a clipboard, and he's like, "You're not on the list." And he kicked him, and he fell down the stairs. Well, when he was revived, he kept yelling, "My back, my back." And he actually had a broken back, but yet he went in for a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
and he actually had a broken back, but in his near-death experience, he was kicked down some stairs. So
that's an interesting story.
Yeah, but there's a lot of funny stories that come out of India for near-death experiences. But
Joe goes way down the rabbit hole. I guess.
Yeah. We actually had a few people on. Razor Ray was on our show. He lives in Detroit, and Ricky Rocks lives in Detroit also. They're both musicians, and they told us their stories, and just so interesting. And coming from Ricky Rocks actually OD'd on cocaine and fell down the steps, and the travel down the steps was probably 3 seconds, but he was over in his near-death experience that he thought was over a half hour.
Wow.
And he actually saw, imagine like a football field, looking across the football field and seeing a wall and just people walking in front of it, and he thinks that was the gates to heaven.
Oh.
But yeah, so interesting.
Yeah.
That's not.
I'm gonna have to
not too cult, but that's something to get into.
Yeah, that's a rabbit hole to go down for sure. Like you get on YouTube though, it's always a rabbit hole.
Oh my god! There's some nights I'm like, it's 3:00 in the morning. I'm watching videos on YouTube. I'm like, I have to be up for work in 3 hours. I can't keep doing this. It's so interesting, right?
It's addictive.
So it is addictive. See when it's stuff you're interested in, and then you're like, oh wait, this is.
Can I ask you girls a question? So this is like totally random. It's not anything about cults. But like when you are taping your shows, have you ever had paranormal activity happen while you're taping your shows?
Yes, we have. Are you seeing anything?
No, not right now, but you never
I did
know,
see
right?
something right behind her there.
Ah.
Not the doll side, the other side.
Over here.
Not
I've
the
been
other side.
there.
Yeah,
You go.
I kept seeing like a flash there.
Yeah, I've seen it. I felt something over there tonight, but so I was wondering if you've seen something. But no, we've had when they're at their house and our other co-host is on, Kelly. Weird stuff is always happening at her, and we've had people say that they actually like see stuff. They're seeing certain spirits by her and stuff like that. So we've had
a lot of
weird stuff happening. We were on with the Ghost Sisters, and we heard like growling, and so weird stuff has happened before. But on with the show.
Right, exactly. It's
Keep on going.
a lot of activity at the homestead.
Do you guys have that happen to you during your shows?
Oh yeah. We've had like we're both on the same side of the table today, but usually Jen's on the other side of the table, and she'll say that she sees things walk behind me, facing this way to the camera. On the other side of the camera is the hallway, and one day we saw a blue light go by, and Jen jumps up with her phone and the
voice
the
recorder.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the spirit box.
Oh yeah,
SB7. And she's like, do you know who lives here? And clear as a bell, you hear, "Hi, Joe."
Oh.
And it was in the voice of my friend Jackie, who passed away, which is a long story. We'll talk about that some other time. But yeah, we have stuff like that. We were doing a show about the Greenbrier ghost. And as we were finishing our show, some lady screamed.
Yeah.
And it picked up in my channel, but it did not pick up in Jen's channel. So it wasn't something in the room.
Yeah.
It was actually electronic.
So interesting.
And it was just a woman screaming.
You got it on your show? You actually recorded it?
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, awesome.
It's like, play that back.
We did like 20 times, like, what is this?
We travel a lot. We do a lot of our shows at conventions and stuff in haunted locations. So we get crazy stuff happen all the time.
All the time.
I want to do that. I want to take the show one day to a haunted location and do that. I think that's interesting. So
do it.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe like you'll get like a ton of evidence, especially because one, they're curious about what you're doing, and then the electronics, right? They're gonna just like right in on you.
They're just gonna like, hone right in for sure.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to go down to the Detroit 6th precinct. So
yeah, I was just thinking that when you said that.
Yeah. With our buddy Ed and do a show down there. So it definitely would be a good time. But yeah, it's fun. I love doing this stuff. I love, catching stuff. But those EVPs, when you catch that clear voice speaking to you, it's just my favorite.
Yeah. And I mean, I have it in my file here. I'll play it for you after the show. I don't know if I can do it during the show because I don't know if it will go through or not.
Yeah, I want to hear it. I want to hear it. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. It's been a great show. That story is like crazy. I feel so bad, and may she rest in peace. I'm sure she is. And I don't know what to say about the father because I just don't believe really that he didn't do it. I just feel like you would tell unless he's holding his own confession.
I seriously think he was involved.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, 100%.
I agree.
I think he was there when it happened.
Yes. Do you guys got any dates or anything you guys got going on coming up? Conventions you're going to, anything like that?
Our live appearances, we're going to be in Ann Arbor, July 17th at the Wyndham Garden Hotel for the Michigan Bigfoot Conference.
Okay.
That's coming up. We've got the Midwest Parafest here in Toledo, but the big one is Michigan Paracon up in Sault Ste. Marie. We're going to be up there. That is if anybody in the listening area or the video area wants to go somewhere where you're going to see someone from the TV show, everybody is there.
Everybody.
It is just a blast. The parties are unbelievable, and tons of great speakers. Anybody that in the paranormal is going to be there.
For sure.
I know. People were telling me to go. Oh, you got to go up there, and it's like I have something else booked that week, but I'm like next year I'm gonna definitely make it out there next year because everyone says it's pretty awesome. So
it's amazing. It's so much fun. And it's so beautiful and haunted up there. If It's just like everywhere you go, there's something, right? You know,
That's awesome.
Yeah, and if we
Get out there.
a lot of the conventions that we go to, we definitely bring our recording equipment and we record interviews at the convention. So if anybody is there and wants to get on the show, they're welcome to.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, you
Very
guys. Well,
nice,
thank you for coming on. This was fun and
thank you so much. We appreciate
Very
it.
interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Denise and Heather.
all right, you guys have a good night. Thank
All
you.
right.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.